Okay, one of the most common methods that's used in strength training is training to failure and beyond. And so we're going to talk about sort of the physiological effects of that and how do you actually incorporate failure and beyond failure techniques. So the Austrian Oak, six-time Mr. Olympia, regarded as the greatest bodybuilder of all time, Arnold Schwarzenegger, said, "The last 3 or 4 reps is what makes the muscle grow. This area of pain divides the champion from someone else who is not a champion. That's what most people lack, having the guts to go on and just say they'll go through the pain no matter what happens." So what is failure? Failure occurs initially during the concentric phase of a repetition when the muscles cannot produce sufficient force to lift a given load beyond a critical joint angle or sticking point. Failure can be reached unintentionally when trying to reach a certain number of reps, or failure can be reached intentionally to reach a specific repetition maximum. We're going to talk about using failure training for power training, strength training, hypertrophy / local muscular endurance, and beyond failure techniques. So if we talk about power, as you know, power is work over time. Work is force times distance. We can also say force times velocity. So if you're to press a barbell that weighs 100 pounds in 2 seconds or in 4 seconds, the rep you completed in 2 seconds would have more power. Activities which require high power amounts include vertical jumping, shot putting, swinging a bat, and throwing a punch. So if you look within a given set, and you look at upper body strength, right here, this is looking at several subjects over several repetitions, looking all the way from 60% of 1RM to 75% of 1RM, and you notice that regardless of intensity, power starts to decline at 30 to 40% of the load. So you don't want, for power, if you're trying to optimize power during a given session, you're probably not going to use failure training because velocity will be slowed drastically. Okay, so if you can hit something for a set of 10, then you might do 3 to 4 reps with it, maybe 5. For legs, we see it's 50 to 60%. So if you do a set of 10, if you have a 10 RM, you probably do a set of 5 to 6. And while this is certainly not universal, Izquierdo did 16 weeks of failure training versus non-failure training and found that non-failure resulted in greater increases in power than the failure. For example, if you did 3 by 6 reps of failure at 80% 1RM, you might do 6 by 3 reps, or you might do 4 sets of 5 reps to non-failure, which probably would be more beneficial. And you'll find out why when we talk about cluster set training. Now, training for absolute strength involves recruiting as many motor units as possible within a given set. So here's 3 reps in a 6 RM set. That's 4 reps in a 6 RM set. That's 6 reps in a 6 RM set. So as you near failure, you're recruiting all your motor units. To support that, we can see that here. This is a study we did at University of Tampa with Jordan Joy, who's now in Muscle Farm, Ryan Lowry, myself, also Sean McCleary. What we did was we had people either do their 10 RM, so they trained to failure doing squats, or they had a 1-minute rest period between the 10 RM set. So the traditional is the open circles. Notice that this is motor unit recruitment. Notice that motor unit recruitment went up from rep 1 to rep 10, whereas if you got a break in between, motor unit recruitment went up to rep 5, went down, and then went up again. So the point being that you don't maximize motor unit recruitment without going to failure. So failure can be important. One thing I want to point out, though, what they did was, one thing that you realize, if you do train to failure every set, it does cause a lot of central fatigue, which we'll talk about. And if you go to failure on the first set, volume drops on the second set. So they did a study here where they did non-failure training versus non-failure training for the first sets, but failure on the last set. So, for example, the non-failure group was 8x3. The failure on the last set was 4x6. The first 3 rep sets, they didn't fail. And the last set, they went to failure. The group that failed on the last set had the greatest gains in strength. So what it suggests is that you should likely not place failure on the first set. You should wait to the last set. But all the other sets, maybe you're stopping short of 1 repetition. So if you can hit 11 reps, maybe you hit 10. But on the last set, you go all the way out. So again, bottom line, training near to failure in each set and then officially to failure on the last set is ideal for strength gains. So, and that's basically what we're seeing here, training to failure in the last set. So one thing I want to point out that they're doing here is, what about hypertrophy? We know metabolic stress is important for hypertrophy. So they did non-failure training, 2 groups, and then they did a failure training group. If you notice, blood lactate levels are much greater when you actually train to failure. We have a strength endurance, which is basically how many reps you can get in a hypertrophy range, was going to be important for total volume. So Willardson, who's done a lot of work in this area, compared 3 sets of 13 to 15 repetitions of failure versus 4 sets of 10 to 12 to non-failure. So they're stopping at anywhere about 2 to 5 reps from failure. In total, the reps and volume were the same. So they actually found that for strength endurance, training near failure every set versus training to complete failure every set, there are no real differences. So, what that's basically saying is I think if you look at the fact that you're going to get better strength gains if you fail in the last set, probably what you should do is train near failure for the first couple sets and then fail in the last. Now, one of the things, again, that you have to understand is that if you do train to failure every set, it could cause fatigue. But again, that's very important to sort of understand. So in this study, what they did was they had a failure versus non-failure training group. So they basically went to failure every single set. And the non-failure group went up in testosterone, and whereas the failure group did not, and the failure group went down in IGF-1. So again, what this is pointing out is that you can't fail every set. You want to strategically place that. We're going to have less fatigue if you place it on the last set. And again, if you go to failure every single set, what this is showing basically is that cortisol tends to go up, whereas the non-failure group tend to go down. So basically use this strategically. Let's talk about what happens when you go beyond failure. So once you've gone to failure, a spotter can provide the lifter with sufficient assistance to progress to the sticking point, or you can also do something like strip sets. So this study, Drink Water, had people at the end of every set do 1 force rep, 3 force reps, and 4 force reps per set. You see that basically there's no differences in strength. In fact, the 4 force reps kind of made things go a little bit too downhill. So, if you're going to do force reps, no more than 1 to 3. The other thing to realize is that force reps, but the benefit of force reps, though, is it could be good for hypertrophy. So what you're seeing here is maximal repetitions versus force reps. MR is, you're looking at growth hormone, which may not be the most anabolic hormone for muscle, but it is an indicator of high metabolic stress. And if you look at the top group, that's a group that did force reps. If you look at the bottom group, that's a group that just went to failure. And the force reps cause greater sort of metabolic hormonal response. Free testosterone is higher in the maximal reps as well as total testosterone. But forced reps lead to greater neuromuscular fatigue. So what you're seeing here is maximal isometric force and maximal EMG. Maximal force is at the top. You have 2 sets of leg press, 4 sets of leg press, 2 sets of squats, 2 sets of knee extensions, and then you look 24, 48, and 72 hours later. Notice that maximal isometric force and maximal EMG are suppressed longer, and the EMG is indicative of central drive, is suppressed longer in the beyond failure group than the failure group. So what it suggests is that it could take up to, after even 72 hours, you could still have depressed force output, or definitely by 24 hours you're centrally fatigued still. So the point is you have to take that into consideration when you're periodizing your training. You can't do force reps every single workout. You can't do beyond failure every single workout. You can't do beyond failure every single set, because eventually it's going to cause too much fatigue and your performance is going to fail or lower on subsequent bouts of training. We see here that on forced reps, cortisol is higher than maximal reps. The other thing to realize that if you do forced reps on set 1, so what we're looking at here is maximal reps going to failure on set 1. Here's if you do forced reps on set 1. Notice that your performance goes down in set 2. So because you're centrally fatigued. So again, if you're going to use beyond failure techniques, you need to strategically place them near the end of the set. So failure training occurs when an individual can no longer perform a full repetition at given intensity. For power, as you near failure, power decreases, suggesting individuals trying to maximize power during a power session should not fail. For strength gains, training to failure only on the last set may be ideal, as this is when maximal motor unit recruitment occurs, but training to failure every set will lead to overtraining. Assisted reps do not seem to help strength or power if you're already training near failure on strength days. But assisted reps may cause a greater metabolic stress and more anabolic hormone release, which could be good for hypertrophy days. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.